Okay, so good evening. Welcome to Canine Live Talk. This is our 7th episode in this series. The last time we've had a break for about 2 weeks. The last person that we spoke to was Andrea Pintar. So we had overwhelming response, questions afterwards, lots of emails for Andrea. So that was really good. Tonight we have a special guest, and really pleased to be able to. I shan't try and pronounce his surname, but it's Michel from the Netherlands, and Michel is ecologist, biologist, and I've spoken to him today, and some of the things that he has told me in conversations, it just sort of blows your mind. He's an expert with odor, scent, how it moves, what it clings to, and all this type of thing. So I shall bring Michel in now, live from the Netherlands. Good evening, Michel.
Good evening, Hugh. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for taking part in this.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Yeah, so you've some of the things that you've already told me today have blown my mind. I'm not a scientist. I'm just a mere dog trainer. But yeah, some of the things that you're involved in, or have been involved in, are amazing. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more. And I'm pretty sure that our viewers will find some of your, some of your stuff fascinating. So, Michel, you're in the Netherlands. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your extensive?
Well, I've been involved with dogs since I was basically born, of course. But then I think it was 1999 that it became a bit more serious. So I started with training dogs for different purposes. Man trailing started to come up, so we did man trailing with the dogs, then I did detection work with the dogs, but all was based around wildlife, because I'm also by training a biologist, ecologist. And what I also did from the beginning was I'm a visual tracking specialist. I tried to specialize in that, trailing animals. And these things combined made that I'm involved in different things. Normally daily based, I'm a lecturer at the University of Applied Sciences. There I teach animal behavior, animal training, and also I have students training animals. Next to it, I'm still working on my PhD, where we've trained parasitic wasps for odor detection. I've trained horses for odor detection, and of course, I still train my own dogs for odor detection, and the dogs that are involved in how do you call that in English? In contraband smuggling.
Okay.
So that's at the moment what I'm doing. One of my dogs is, for example, working as a scent-specific dog for otter pup detection. So if an otter lactating female is being hit by a car, I'm called in, and then we're trying to match the odor of the female with the pups, and then we backtrack basically the female otter, and we hope then to detect the pups in order to get them and to raise them again. I'm also involved in the golden jackal scat detection work I'm also doing. So that's and of course with Wesley with the conservation dogs, pangolin and all these kinds of things. So maybe that gives a small idea of what I'm doing.
A small idea of a massive subject area, really. So you were talking. So you tracking and trailing, and also odor with detection dogs as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Out of all those, which do you prefer?
Oh, that's a good question, actually. But what I like doing is being the two things that are really specialized in. That's wildlife odorology, I call it, but it's specific. How does the wildlife scent works What is it? What is it based upon? What are the different components? How do we train a dog to generalize it? So that's one thing. And what I love doing is basically combining visual tracking with my dog in order to become the best detector possible. So what you're basically doing is combining these things. And I think I've learned a lot also from my visual tracking. For example, what I told you before is if I remember that I was tracking a fox through the snow visually, and then you could see that he was moving around, and then he stopped at certain points, pointing to the left, and then you can see in the tracks that it smelled something. And when I went over there, and I always have a little puffer with me with magnesium powder, so that puffs, and you see the air blow. And what I saw is actually that the wind was coming every time when he stopped. It was like a little corridor where wind came out, blowing out. So for a fox, it was like natural in his hunting that he would go there and just sniff it in order to get the information needed and then trot it off. And then again with another point. So that taught me that landscape is three-dimensional. Scent is massive. It's quite interesting. If I see a roe deer marking a tree, it marks it, of course, by rubbing with his antlers, and in between there's a scent mark. So it places scent marks there. It's visually marking, but it's also digging. And in between his how do you call it in English? His hoofs, you have that same scent mark. So it's basically one big scent pool where he says, "Here I live." And then what's surprising is that other animals mark that spot too. So you have a kind of interspecific marking amongst the animals. That fascinates me too. So it's, and then I also see that the dogs that are trained on a specific scent sometimes go like, "Huh? What's this?" And that could be because animals, they also use a kind of odor camouflage once in a while. You have those burrowing owls in the States. What they do is they pick, for example, cow dung, and they plaster that around their dung. So it is a kind of an odor from which is overwhelming. So it blocks its own odor. It doesn't block it, but it's minimizing it. I've seen, which was fascinating. I've seen, for example, a marten running over a tree. It was a camera in front of it. We had a camera trap standing there, and it pooed on top of the tree. And then there was how do you call that bird in English? It's a little bird, which is a tree climbing bird, small one, blue with brown.
Okay.
I'm not no. But
I'm not very good on my bird.
But what it did, it took the pieces of scat, and when I followed it, it flew to its nest, and it was actually because it's covering its entrance hole with mud. But it used the scat also, and I figured that if it does that, it would make sense for me in a sense of that smells like predators, so you don't have other predators coming around. So it's kind of the biology around scent is still such a vast thing to go into. It's mind-blowing, fascinating.
Yeah. How I've got a question. I've got a question here about scat actually, so I might as well ask that now. So this question relates to pine martens here in the UK.
Yeah.
So this how different is a pine marten scat to animals, you know, of similar type of animals, similar, you know, how I suppose the question that I've got here is really is the scent of a particular species scat, is it really different to other animals?
Yes, it is. Basically what you have is for example, from the pine marten, you have the storm marten. They're closely related. But scat is a complex thing because scat has to do with what the animal ate. It has to do with where it lives. So it's the entire scent profile of scat is amongst other things, apart from the species itself, it's also environmentally how do you call that? Enriched. A pine marten scat, a pine has its own individual scent profile. And that applies also to, for example, a storm marten. It applies to a weasel and all of them. What you need to do when you're training is that you use all the different samples so that the dog learns to differentiate which one is the one that it needs. Because there are certain odor, if you have odor as a profile, it consists, of course, of key odorants. And you don't know when you're training what key odorants the dog picks, because that's something that the dog does. So what you try to do during your training is to give him as much possibility to fine-tune on species. So when I have Scat from a pine marten and when I have Scat from, for example, a stone marten, you train with both. But there is something else. There is a possibility that if you have an older pine marten or you have a male pine marten, there are how do you call that? There are sex-specific odorants. So if you only use one source, there is a chance that you miss the other ones. Because if the dog says, okay, I need to have this complete picture, and I take this key odorant, and I take this key odorant, and I take this one, and it's, for example, the sex one that he's also combining in its profile, and if it's a female, you might, I'm saying might, you might miss it. Because dogs generalize very easily, and that's the good thing about dogs, they generalize, so that's good. But if you want to be sure, then just use as much of the different mustelid species that you have in that area, and then you train your dog in, basically you do your odor imprinting, and then you go into your discrimination. And with the discrimination, you use those other scents as a non-rewarding one. Does that make sense?
It does, yes, yeah, very clear. So, still talking about Scat, if you, what are the likelihoods of you making mistakes if you train on Scat used from an animal in captivity to locate the animal in wild?
It has to do with the same thing. You have in captivity, the feeding is different. Sometimes you have only one family. So one family of for example, let's say golden jackals. You have one group of golden jackals, but that's all family, one family. So their odorant is one specific kind of odorant, group odorant. Yeah. We also have that. So the risk is if you only take those, that the dog picks the specific key odorants from that group, and you go out there and it says, well, you'll probably get interest in the wild one. But if he gives an alert, that depends on how well he generalizes it. So what you want to do is, what I always do is, if I want to go for golden jackal, then you know that there are a few things are important. It's the entire scent profile of the animal. So when it's possible, you can also get like a swab from the animal itself, because there are all kinds of oils on the skin. The glands give off oils that give a certain specific odorant. So you try to get as much info from different sources for a dog to enable the dog to generalize. So if you only take it from one zoo and you have, for example, 3 samples, it's going to be tougher to train your dog on the generalization purpose that you want. And the other thing is, in the wild, what you also get is that animals, they mark over each other. So a pine marten, for example, what I loved, for example, is when you look, there's a marking of a fox, and then a pine marten pees over it, or a fox pees over it. So what you have is that the scent profile then changes. And also, of course, DNA, etc. is changing. But what happens is that the scent profile is changing. So when you know that a fox urinate over it, try to get other samples that are, for example, from fox, so that you say, okay, this is -2. You don't need this one either. You want to be specific. You want this one. And what we now know, and what I've seen a lot, is that overmarking, interspecies overmarking, of interspecific overmarking, is happening a lot. It happens in Africa, it happens in the United States, it happens in Europe. All of them do it. So I still remember, for example, that when I was walking years back, I wasn't even trailing, but I had my wolf dog, a Czechoslovakian wolf dog, and we were walking on the road downwards, and he indicated on something. We were not training anything, but he indicated, so I was interested, and what we found was a dead pine marten. On top of that pine marten was a fox cat, like, hey, marked over it. So that overmarking behavior is something you have to keep in mind. So what you do when you're training for ecological research is you have to be next to a good dog trainer. You have to, and to know the way scent works, because this is just a very small amount, because it's more complex than that. So you need to know your scent, but you also need to know the biology of the species. And you also need to know how the habitat influences the species and what that does to deodorant. So it's more complex than only using Scat and train it. The good thing is that dogs generalize easy. So when you take 4 or 5 Scats, they probably will. And if you go into the field and he indicates more or less, and you go, oh yeah, good boy, yay, and you got him, then he will go in, and in his mind he goes, oh, this is also what I need to do. Good, cool, yeah, continue. So that's basically how it then works. But when you want to start, and what I always do when I start off, I try to make what I call a target species odor profile. And what I do is I look at the biology of the species. I try to find out as much as I can if I don't know it already. What I then do is I look at its behavioral ecology. So how does it behave within its ecosystem? And from there, I try to get as much info, if that's already there, so maybe it's published somewhere, about the odor chemistry. Because odors are, of course, an animal odor is a volatile organic compound. And a lot of volatile organic compounds are making the entire profile of the odor of that animal.
Yeah.
So what you want is to get as much info about it. And sometimes they've done research, and then you see, for example, publications where they say, oh, we've looked at this, and we saw that these compounds, volatile organic compounds, are found in the female, these are found in the male, and this is what these 6, for example, from a bird species, these 6 they have in common. So what you want to have is those 6. So when you know that there's a difference, you know that you can train them on it, that you want those 6 different ones to be in your dog's nose. Now, you don't know them exactly unless there's possibility to find that out. But if you know that, you can take that into account during the training. And the next thing you do is basically you go from your data, all the data, you combine all your data. And then what you do is you try to get a target scent profile in your mind. And then you start to collect the samples. So if I want to go for, let's say I want to detect, let's just say golden jackal again, but I want to have a Scat. If I can get urine, I'm a happy camper, because the major urinary compounds in it, they also smell. If I get as much samples of that, superb. But I want to have, for example, our hairs. Hairs are usually somehow connected to it. So I try to get as much sources, depending on where it's from, to get a complete picture, so that the dog is able to say, okay, I need this, but I don't want to have the fox, so I need the fox next to it, in order to teach the dog that the fox odor is not the one you want. Because sometimes foxes and golden jackals, they scat together, or they urinate on each other to do this. So, or on the Scat, I mean, they urinate on top of each other, Scat, for example. So that's what you try to do as much as you can.
It's a bit of a minefield of a subject, isn't it? There's a lot to consider. Yeah,
but it's you have a lot to consider, and I always say probably 50 to 60% is not relevant, because the dog generalizes easily. But you have to keep it in mind, because when something goes wrong, I want to know why. Because it's 99% it's my problem as a trainer that I created the problem. I always say to my students, for example, if you train your dog, how many repetitions does your dog need in order to learn something simple? Let's say I teach my dog to sit, and he takes 5 repetitions. If that's something that I know, and I'm building my training protocol, then I know if I'm training him on something, if I'm going over those 5 repetitions multiple times, I'm doing something terribly wrong. Because I know my dog's learning requirements, that he can learn in a specific amount of time and a specific amount of repetitions. So somehow I need to figure out what I'm doing wrong. So that's the same thing with scent. I want to know the complexity of the scent, and if something isn't working, okay, what can it be? What is possible? What is the possibility from the entire odor profile which makes a difference? Same thing if you look, for example, for people who are smuggling. If you're smuggling a bird and you're training on preen gland, yeah, it's okay. But some parrot species don't have preen glands, and the preen gland changes during breeding season. It changes during times. Feathers, if you train only on feathers, yeah, that's nice. But the microbiota on those feathers, they change in time. When it's getting older, it changes. Some die, some don't. And then the volatiles coming off are also changing. So to be exact, you need to know all these things to get the best possible profile that you want. You want the best scent profile for a dog, so you make it as easy as possible for him to know, yeah, this is the one I need. That's the one I have to have. That's what you want. At least that's what I want.
We have two questions that have come in. One is going back to Scat.
Yeah.
How old before you can stop using Scat?
Ideally, that depends. That depends on your research question. What do you need? Is it only for inventory purposes, or is it for DNA detection? Because DNA detection is something else. You want to have a swab of that Scat for your DNA. For example, I'm also involved in wolf monitoring in the Netherlands. I need fresh Scat in order to get the right DNA. If the Scat is too degraded and the DNA is degraded, then I don't have anything for it. So if I want to train my dog to find the fresh Scat because I need DNA, for example, then you need fresh Scat. And I only use it once. But that means that I need a good supply. So I try to use it once. What you can do is make scent samples, because if you have scent, scent is headspace is what the scent is, because that's what the volatiles are in. So if I can create a few samples from other material, then I can use that. But ideally, you want to have fresh Scat, because that works the best. And there are possible options in order to get different, more samples, especially if it's rare and you can't get them as much. On the other hand, if you have to train for inventory purposes, so how do you do that? Then you need to have your search protocol in order. That means that you have your search survey. That's probably going to involve that you go to the search area, and then the question is, what is your time mark for the Scat? Are you okay with old Scat? Are you okay with Scat that is fresh? Are you okay with Scat that's, for example, halfway in the time frame, or do you want to have your very old Scat also? If it's only for identifying if a species has been there, no problem. You can take all of them, but then you have to train on these different ages.
Yeah.
And then you also have to train in the amount of so the concentration of the odor of the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds. You need to keep in mind that you also want to train on different concentrations of it, which is quite easy, because if you put them in a bucket and then you make a hole in it, then you make 4 or 5 holes. If the headspace is good enough, then you get more scent or less scent. So that's not so difficult, but you have to do it in order for the dog to not only say, okay, this is the small amount that I need. No, you need the entire picture.
Okay, that's cool. And so we have a question here about imprinting on Scat.
Yes.
So let me just try and get this up. I can't. Right, it's not letting me get it up on the screen. But the question is, how many times when imprinting on Scat, how many repetitions? I'm just trying. The English isn't very good here. How many repetitions when imprinting on Scat would you have to do for a new odor? I think.
That's a difficult question. What I'm thinking of, I think that what is meant is how many times you have to repeat it. That depends on your dog, because that's not something I can't. If you imprint on an odor, it depends how your learning sequence of your dog is. If you want to train how many different species, is that the question? You want to train Scat on?
I think it's how many times do you have to during the imprint process on a particular Scat? How many times would you have to repeat the process for a dog to remember it?
That's what I already said. It depends on your dog. That's something what I do is testing. I make a training protocol and I say, okay, I start training. And let's say there's a very good article about that, basically. A.D. Schoon wrote a very good article about that on otter species. So the amount of scent you need. If you have a good training protocol, you can say, okay, I start with one specific scent, let's say Scat. And if it's recognized, let's say you have from one animal, you have 6 samples. So you train on these 6 samples, and then you have a test procedure. So the test procedure is, if I place it somewhere and it's 10 times, for example, just by the thumb, it's the idea behind it. If you have 10 times, he's correct. Okay, perfect. You can continue. But if he isn't, then you know something is wrong in your imprinting. So I can't just say how many times the imprinting is. It has to do with your dog. You have to read your dog. And that's also to do with the quality of the Scat. Yeah. And the amount of different Scat samples you have from the different individuals.
Yeah, I think
So it's not that easy to answer. It's more complex.
It's a bit, as you say, it's a bit of a difficult question. The age of the dog, the type of dog, what the way, the location of where you're imprinting. There's lots of factors, isn't there?
Exactly. And then again,
so
it's imprinting is one, and then discrimination is the second thing you want to train on. And then in the field, the good thing about scent is from Scat is that it's deposited and it's stationary, so it doesn't move. And what you then get is that the scent is, if there's not much wind, you would have a nice layering of the scent going out. So the environment is also influencing how the scent is going through the landscape. What I told you before about the wolves, what I found out that sometimes, well, a lot of times, wolves scats on crossroads. Yeah. And I tried to figure out, when I saw that, I go like, why? So I used a puffer again, and then you see that where they did it, at least in the few samples that I had, they had the best dispersion of wind during that moment. It was fresh Scat, by the way. So what you got was a beautiful way of, for him, it was like, I don't know if it's consciously what he's thinking, but what he does unconsciously or consciously is getting the best scent sent out in the area. So it's like statement is getting a lot better than when I put it here. A fox does basically the same thing. Foxes like to scat on a higher, a little bit higher up. Why? It smells perfectly. So your smell is everywhere. So that's something you also have to get into your mind, and that's something you have to do during your training and during your. If I write a training protocol, I have different. It's a lot of different steps in between. I always say to my students at the university, you have to make a training protocol, and every step needs to be perfect. And then one thing to be sure, every step is not going to be perfect, but every animal is different. But as long as you have those steps, you know that you can go back to, and you in your mind you go like, oh, wait a second, this is what I've done. This is this. I know my odor profile. Let's see. What have I done wrong? So for me, it's always going back to the handler to see, or to the trainer basically, like, what have I done wrong, or what is during my training process a problem, and how can I fix it? And then there is, of course, that you start with the odor imprinting or discrimination, your operational field training. So you start to train in the field. The dog needs to generalize in that field. And then you start operational training. Then you have your maintenance training. And what I always do in the field is I want to know how my dog is feeling. So I hide some samples. And if even a dog has a shitty day once in a while. So if you know that, then you also know what your outcome can be. So I also test my dog before I start, like, where are you standing now? Oh, I'm standing here. Okay, good. I know that. So I have a reference in my mind what's going on.
You talking about the foxes when they deposit a scat and it the odor, moves around. There are lots of, recently I've seen here in the UK people doing workshops and training, trying to mimic how scent moves.
Yeah.
Which I always like to see what people are doing to try and mimic the movement of odor. Yeah. I see people using smoke. Yeah. All sorts of different things. What is there a good way of trying to mimic how odor moves around? Now, for me, it's a very, it's a bit of a, well, again, it's a, how do you try and explain something that you can't see?
Yeah. So you visualize it. For me, there's something before that. I've used smoke, I've used puffers, I've used, but in the field, I even use other things. What I use in the field, for example, is I look at seeds dispersing. You have plant seeds, wind blows, and you see them move around in the landscape. That tells me something about how the wind is moving during my trailing, during my working with my dog. But something else is also important. I need to know scent is influenced by a few things. It's by diffusion, it's by convection, it's by the layering of the different things that are going on. So what I try to do is first, let's for example say if I go along the water edge, is the water warmer or colder? If you know that water is, for example, the temperature difference gets a draft, so then you know there's a draft. If you look at the vegetation and you have, for example, dark leaves, very dark leaves, during a warm summer with sun, that area is hotter than the one vegetation where you have, for example, light leaves or there's white sand. Those are microclimates. So what I try to do during during training and during working with my dog is paying attention to that. I pay attention to how if I can see, for example, how wind moves over the water or to the trees, at what level it moves. Last time I was in the field with two other dog handlers, and what I showed them was stand still. Somewhere over here there's an odor. Now first look at the trees, look at the vegetation. How is the wind moving? Okay, the wind is moving, and then what we saw was, for example, that there was a lower area where the wind was moving that way, and above, let's say, waist height, the wind was moving that way. So you had a microclimate there. If you only look at the top of the trees, then you will be going into the wrong direction. At least you want to optimize your detection, your probability of detection, your POD, you want to optimize it. So when you only observe that part first, and then you go in with your dog, it makes more sense for a dog, and you can then adapt your search strategy for the most optimal detection. So for me, yes, I use smoke because I want to see how it moves. But what smoke does, it gives you a general idea of how scent goes through something. But I want to know more, because if you have, for example, a scent cone is twirling around. It's turbulent. It turns. And here you have no scent. There you have a more concentration. There is less. There is more. So what an animal does, and it doesn't matter what animal it is, because I've seen insects do it, I've seen dogs do it, I've seen horses do it. What they do is they hit that scent cone side, and they slowly go in, and then I'm out of it. Then they go in again. They're zigzagging partly into it, and then they pinpoint it. Well, there are more search strategies amongst animals, but this is one of them that I'm just describing. So for me, it's reading, it's anticipating what I can expect, and that's what you work with. And then yes, I like to check things. So if I see my dog during a training and he's working something out and it doesn't go as I had in my mind with the wind, etc., and I go like, he's good, he knows it, I don't. What have I done wrong? Why don't I know it? So I use my for example, I use some magnesium powder, I puff it, and then I see what it does. And 90% of the time, when something is happening that I don't understand, it has to do with the microclimate that is there on that specific piece of habitat where the source is. So you sometimes see a dog really go like, oh man, I can't find it. It's here somewhere, but I can't just. And then when you go into it and you look at the vegetation, you look at the soil, you look at the soil structure, you look at, for example, if you have a soil where there is a sand, has a lot of holes in it, and if you're looking for burrowing animals, sand is the ideal because there's a lot coming out of it. If it's clay, it's more closed, so you have a more central point of entrance and exit. These are things that you keep in mind during your work, at least what I try to keep in mind every time I'm in the field working on a specific kind of scent. So yes, smoke is ideal for visualization. It's lovely. But I also want in my mind, you don't walk around with the smoke when you're working with your dog. So for learning purposes, perfect. Operational, it is looking at your landscape, analyzing, continuously looking at your dog, but also with your peripheral view, looking at how things are going on. How is the gas moving? What do I see flowing around? Usually there's always, when there's a little bit of wind, you can even see like seed pollens drifting around. That tells you something. That tells you something how things move. You can look at trees, the movement of trees, leaves. That tells you something if there's a more or less turbulence. Most of you probably have been sitting in an office looking outside. At least that's something when I do in an office, I hate it. So I look outside. And what you then see is, for example, in a corner, you see that leaves are twisting like a twister. That's the how do you call it? The eddying of the wind. So that these things are the same in the field. You can if you observe that and you observe your dog, you've got that in your mind. And always keep in mind that there are different layers. Scent is, here's your source. Then you have your, for example, if you look for animals, you have your rafts here. So the skin rafts. Then you have the heavier molecules, the heavier volatile organic compounds, they fall down. And then you have the lighter organic compounds, and they fall down a bit further. That's when you have stationary something. It's different when you have the positional odorants or you have airborne odorants, because there's a difference in that too. But when you work your dog, and when your dog is well trained and he has the right, and you're reading it, there are dogs who have picked out specific key odorants, and the one is the for example, the lighter molecule weight volatile organic compounds, and the other ones are the heavier ones. You can even see when your dog is indicating on those during, it's minimum, so you have a minimum change of behavior. But that minimum change of behavior says to me, hey, look at that. Now he's in the lighter one. So he has to hit somewhere. Yeah, now he's got the heavier ones. And now he's into it. Yeah. Now you get what people always say. Oh, now I see a real change in behavior. Yeah, that's before that, there are usually 6 more steps. So when I train dog handlers, I want them to see the minimum indication, and then you have the head snaps, etc. There, those are too easy. There are more before that are much more interesting, because they tell you something about how the odor is layering in the landscape, and you want that layering in your mind. So I always make, somebody once told me that you have your mind map. You're a team with your dog, so you keep your mind map. And what I always do is, if I see that, oh, he's got something here, he's got something here, okay. So, and then what sometimes I see handlers, they see their dog doing that, and they just walk off the other way because the dog goes that way. And I'm going like, the dog has a problem now. You can help him. You don't necessarily have to walk behind your dog all the time. You can think, and you as a team are perfect. So if you see that and you saw that there was a lot of interest, bring him back, work on it, and do it, and then you'll see that it will work it out. He'll work it out. But because of the wind direction, he goes off, and he's right, because there was a change of wind that pushed him off that way. But during the process, you already saw that he indicated with those small minimum changes of behavior, he indicated that it was there, because you know your dog, you read that. And then if he goes off that way, it has to do with the wind, because something changed. So if you keep that in mind, you can go back and then you can work it at the optimum, and then you can find it out. And depending on how for example, people always say, I trained one of my dogs to show me again. So he indicates, and then I said, show me. He puts his nose down. Why? Sometimes it's so minute. I've been looking, I'm a pretty good tracker, a visual tracker. But I've been looking at things and I go, I don't know what you see, but somewhere it is. And if I ask him to point, I go, there it is, thank you. So that's one thing. And at the same time, that's also something I want sometimes, because if I work with, let's say you work with wolf Scat or with Scat from golden jackals, there is a possibility of disease transmission. For example, I know now that wolves in Eastern Germany, they have a sacrophatic mage, I think it's called. It's sacrophatic mage, the mage thing, the disease.
Yeah.
If you know that, then you're working with your detection dog. You don't want that. So I saw people training on wolf Scat, and they were training almost on top of it. And I was going like, I don't want that. I want my dog to be at least 2 meters away from it. He's indicating it. He knows the concentration difference, because I don't want him to get in contact with it because of disease transmission. So I am trying to always keep those things in mind. So I don't want, people are sometimes just going like, yeah, let's do it. And I go, yeah, but there are risks involved. So how can I minimize the risk for my dog? Because I want to work with him for a long time. These are all kinds of things that continuously work through those things. And the difference between the positional odorants and, for example, airborne odorants, if you're trailing a dog, you're trailing it on scent wafts that are there. You're trailing it on different kinds of volatiles that are coming from it. It's different than when you have only airborne lightly ones from a stationary source. So all these things you have to keep in mind. So Scat detection is something else than, for example, detection of a live animal.
Yes. How you touched on it there about changing behavior and knowing your dog.
Yeah.
How I've got a few questions myself for you about this. Mm-hmm. It's obviously very important that you know your dog.
Yes.
because for that reason changes in behavior, and sometimes they can be very, very small. Have you ever, and how many times have you found stuff with your dogs when they haven't given a full indication? It's just been a change in behavior. They haven't been given a full indication for various reasons, but because of their change in behavior, you've been able to locate whatever you were looking for.
Well, I've had that, yes. And at the same time, in my mind, I always say that's a training problem.
Okay.
Yeah, because I should have trained better, because otherwise he would have found it perfectly. But there are instances that they can't cross, for example, a water area, and it's indicating, and it's not giving a full indication because it's the other side of the water. So you know that, hey, it's got to be over there. So you just take the car, drive around the bridge, then you come back to the area, and then I usually put a piece of biodegradable paper on that spot, so I know from the other side where it exactly is, and then I start from there. So there are things that go on like that, but I also have found things which, if you train well, you should have a final indication. But there are instances that it's difficult because the scent, for example, is contaminated partly. So the dog's going like, yeah, I know it is, but it's not sure. You get that idea. I'm just trying to visualize it in my mind like that. Yeah. And then you look and say, okay, that's it. Sometimes, for example, no, I think that's what. Yes, the answer is yes. I've had that, and I think a lot of them are also have to do with training. So that's for me going back to the drawing table, looking at what I've done wrong to get it better. And there are sometimes reasons for it, like there was a water area we can't cross, and then you see the indication, and then you know that's there. But normally, when you see those small behavior changes, what you try to see, if you see them, you know whether it is, if you know your dog well, you know whether it is, for example, the lighter molecules or the heavier molecules, those layerings. And if you get that into your picture and you have that layering in your mind, then you can calculate where you can get your dog up to the right direction. Because when a dog can't find it, it usually has to do that in the microclimate, there is something changing. So I've seen dogs where the leash, for example, was somehow stuck. When I was training handlers, one of the leashes was stuck. The dog was really going like, I'm finding it, I'm almost on the spot, and then the handler ripped the leash up like that. Oh, he's almost trapped up. As soon as you do that, the entire air is turbulence. So your dog can start again, getting into it and finding out how it works. So you have to be. For me, it's all about reading, calculating, thinking. You're the thinker. The dog does the work, but you're also thinking. For example, when you're finding in search and rescue, something completely different. But just to give you an example how my mind thinks. I remember the first wolf tracks that I found in the Netherlands that was on me. I found them by accident, basically, because I was walking and I saw them. And then I go like, huh? What I did was, are there any human tracks next to it? No. At the exit points from that area, near, for example, places where you have where cars are parked, do I see the same footprint of the dog together with human footprints of the same age? No, I don't see them there. Okay. Going back, has it all got all the characteristics? Yes, you write a report, you send it to the specialist, and they confirm that it was the case. But it's plus. So for me, it's the same with the dog. If the dog works, it's going like this. I've seen. And then my mind is going plus. Got him. Does that answer the question more or less?
Yes, yeah, it does perfectly. Yeah, no, that's very good. We've so Chris, there's a comment on the screen from Chris Nikolic. So we spoke about Chris earlier. Chris is a Cadaver Cadaver dog trainer and instructor in. So he's agreeing with you and your field craft there, Michel.
Yes, perfect.
Have you ever with Chris? It was and Andrea. It was a very interesting subject. Obviously, cadaver graves and mass graves.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever done anything with any of that kind of work? Because
not with that grave. I mean, let's say the cadaver dogs. I haven't worked with cadaver dogs. No, that's not completely true. I'm also involved in search and rescue as a visual tracker with one dog. We had one dog for something else, so I've been a man trail handler also. So we've worked on that, but not specific on Cadaver. I've worked with changes in scent, etc. Because if decaying, let's say, a corpse goes to different stages and thereby different smells. So the scent profile changes during every, probably well known, of course. The scent profile changes during every stage. So you have to train on that. But I think it's basically the same with animals. When you work with live animals or when you work with products, for example, if you go for contraband, products of animals, they change in time. If you have a feather, what I said, if it's a fresh feather, there is preening oil on it, depending on the species, by the way. But there's preening oil on it, and there are microbiota on it. They are actually changing that scent profile in time. So you have to take that into account when you are searching for specific content, which has to do, for example, with feathers or something else. Which is an example.
Yeah.
So that's something that I look at and that I try to incorporate in the work with wildlife. Aging, a young animal smells different than an old animal. During breeding season, an animal changes its odor profile. Birds, they change their odor profile, some birds, during breeding. Eggs, for example, if you're searching for eggs go to different stages. So the odor profile of an egg changes during different times. So if you're looking for contraband like stolen, like eggs that are stolen for the purpose of rearing them somewhere else, then you can put them on postage. Depending on the stage they're in, the odor profile changes. And you can't just take, because in the past I saw people just taking chicken eggs. I'm like, yeah, that's interesting, but that's not going to work. Maybe the dog generalizes, but the thing is that a chicken egg is completely different in odorants than specific birds. For example, if you look at birds, let's say the scent, some have preen glands, they preen on it. Others don't have preen glands. They have this powdery down, like cockatoos, like parrots. Some parrots have those powdery down things. You train on that, because if you train only on birds with preen glands, then might be that the dog picks that as a key odorant and says, okay, we've got this. So if I have this and this and this together, that's a bird. But then you might miss the parrots, because they have those powdery glands. They're not the glands, but the powder, chalk powder like stuff. They smell completely different. You can smell it. If you smell the different birds, you can smell that too. So you need to take that into account when you train your dog. You want to have those species also involved if you want to have a dog that generalizes on live birds. For example, when you're searching for smuggling species.
Yeah. I have a question here, Michel. What is the maximum amount of odors you could train a dog on?
Maximum amount of odors. Good question.
Now that's
there's a discussion going on for years already in this area. There's something else that I want to answer then first, because if you train for scat detection, for example, if you're training your dog on specific scat, and one is, for example, of pine marten, and then you take your dog to, I don't know, somewhere else where you have another environmental or another ecology where there is no pine marten, and you train on another animal, that's easy. But if you train different samples of scat, for example, in an area where they all live, yes, that's something else. Then I would say I would use less than if I go to an area where there are where you know that there are you got two animals that you train your dog on, specific scats, and then these scats can be found in that area. So I also look at the ecology. So I look at the ecology, how many animals can I, because if you train a dog to find different scats, the dog will go like, yeah, I can alert here. I can alert here too. Because here I got pine marten, here I got red fox, here I got this, and here I got that. You don't want that. So I think what I would personally do, you can, I'm sure, I know you can train on more scents. But I have always said I have a maximum of 4 to 5. Because I don't want to work with more than that. That's for me, personally. But you can do more, I'm sure. But you have to look at the ecology of the species that you're looking for. And you can do, of course, if you work, for example, on contraband, I don't mind. Yeah, I can get more odorants trained in him because that's a specific area where you want them all to be caught.
Yeah, I was reading only 3 or 4 weeks back about someone training wildlife detection dogs. They were training a dog on 28 different odors. So scats, feathers, all a whole manner of odor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm no expert, but I would imagine 28 is a lot.
It is. And the question is, why would you do it? That's my question first. Second question is, I do think that dogs are able to do that. You know, the dog Rico, I thought it was a border collie. He was able to get something like 1,100 commands for different visual toys that he had to pick up. So
yeah.
Memory, I'm sure that there is a big memory for a dog. So that's for sure. But the question is always, I'm looking from the perspective of if I go into the field, then there are projects. The project is X amount of time. My dog has got an X amount of life. So I want to have, and then I can check what I want to work with. That many different things, for me is going like, yeah, it's a lot. How do you do your maintenance training, for example? What's your training protocol? How would you keep up the quality? There are a few questions that are popping up in my mind.
Well, yes, you've just said what some of my initial thoughts were. I mean, when I train a drugs dog, it may be on 6 or 7 or 8 different drugs, which I'm happy with, and maintain good training for those odors. When personally, I think when you start going over, 15, 20 odors, that's an awful lot of work that you're potentially creating for yourself. I have no doubt that a dog has the ability to do it.
Yeah, sure.
It's the quality and maintenance, as you say, isn't it?
And for me, it's also I want to know. I'm trying to look at what I call micro changes of behavior of my dog for a specific scent, and that's per scent different. Because the heavier molecules, they drop depending on the different one. So I want to know my dog exactly in that scent profile. At least I try. I never probably will know them exactly, but I try to do it as good as possible. So I have the best method of reading my dog. If I have that different odorants, for me it will be more difficult to keep up the quality to read when he's what he's detecting. So it's possible, I'm sure, but I would never do it.
No. How important are dogs for wildlife detection, especially now as we're in this world pandemic with COVID-19, and they think that there is a link between bats, potentially pangolins. How important are the use of dogs to try and combat that?
What you saw is that in the last couple of years you saw a huge growth of let's say wildlife detection dogs. I remember back in 1999 there were only some border people working on it. There were maybe 2 or 3 ecologists that were working with it. And now you see that's booming. So there's more knowledge. I do think that for detection of vectors of diseases, dogs can definitely play a role. Dogs have played a role, for example, if you look at wildlife diseases, the sacrophatic mage that I told you before. I've known of a research where people have trained dogs to detect, how do you call these animals in English? Gems, I don't know the English name. Ibex. I think they were ibex, not sure. But that they were following the ones that were infected by sacrophatic mage. And the dogs were able to do that. So they could come to a carcass and identify it, or they could identify animals which had that disease. So I'm sure that you can get the factors and you can even get the diseases. If you have a disease, your scent profile changes. So there's also a possibility there. But yes, I think there's a huge potential. At the same time, I always say it's tough. I saw people already working on, for example, coronavirus, working on a virus. Oof. That's something I think. I don't know if that has if that has a working purpose. You know what I mean? If that will be
Yeah.
effective in the field. I always said you can better have insects, for example, to do that, because they are not mammals. I can train I've trained Pacific wasp on odorants. You can train a Pacific wasp in about 3 to 5 minutes on an odor. You apply that, so within a day, you have them trained. Okay, they live like 3 weeks max, but if you train them shortly, you have an entire batch that is, you don't have a risk of let's say, like zoonosis, that's
Yeah.
the risk of getting infection. And you have a large amount of detectors in a small time frame area. So I always look at those things like, yeah, I can imagine that you use them for like the vectors of the diseases, like if you have the bats maybe, or the pangolin. Pangolin, of course, they're already hugely smuggled. They're almost extinct, unfortunately. So they're already on the scrutinance. But
yeah.
So I think there's a huge potential, depending on where you look at.
There seems to be a huge increase in people getting involved in wildlife with dogs now. As you say, a few years ago there wasn't many people doing it, but now everybody seems to be doing it. Are you able to tell us any about some of the work that you're involved with Scent Imprint for dogs, and what your role is there, Michel?
What I do is I got the advisory role. So what I do is advise and looking at the training protocols, but also looking at the scent profiles. So I'm trying to get the dogs the best optimum for detection. For ecological research, I make the surveys, so the survey protocols, how you can best optimize your detection. I train some of the handlers that we have. So that's basically what I'm doing now. And everything is within either the detection of contraband or ecological monitoring. So those are the two things. Invasive species monitoring, for example, is also one of them that we work at the moment operationally with. And I go in the role of training the handlers when there's a training problem, jumping in, etc.
How important is it? You're obviously you're totally not what I am. I'm not an academic. I'm just a dog trainer. But you're obviously a biologist, ecologist, and how important is it to have someone like you working with someone like Wesley? Wesley's not a scientist. He's a very good dog trainer. How important is it to have advice from a biologist and ecologist to work together?
If you're working for animal detection work, wildlife detection work, I think it's more than wise to have a biologist with you in your team who can tell you something about the behavior of the animal in the field, who can tell you something about the animal itself, who can tell you something about the scent profile. Only that's not something biologists know. It's something I learned myself, so there's no study for that, unfortunately. But it's important that you know the species, and as a dog handler, you need to know the species when you're going into the field. So a biologist is the one that can teach you about the behavior of the animals, the places where they are, so that you know how to train your dog for optimal detection. If you want to have a dog that is trained for detecting a certain species, which is also a burrowing species, then in what kind of soil are they always burrowing? What kind of plants are they eating? So that has then you can look at maps, for example, and say, okay, if I'm looking at this map, and I know that this is the habitat where they are probably going to be living. I see that this is the soil, so I want to train in a similar habitat in my training, so I can optimize later on when I'm operational. So I think a biologist is somebody who can at least an ecology biologist. If you have somebody who is knowledgeable, and it doesn't have to be a biologist, it can also be somebody else, but you need to have somebody, and some people are more knowledgeable than biologists about certain animal species because they are citizen scientists who have a huge knowledge about that species. You take somebody into your team with that knowledge because they help you if you listen carefully, you can develop your training program accordingly to the species you're going to look for. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah, yeah. No, I like the. Obviously, I've known that you've been working with Wesley. It's nice. There are lots, as we've discussed earlier. There are lots of people jumping on bandwagons and getting involved in things. But it's nice that Wesley has brought you in as a specialist to complement what he is doing and advise him. It's doing it properly, isn't it?
Yes, it's for a good cause. I always say that's the best thing to do. You want to save some. Wildlife conservation is something which is it needs, I think, specialists to do a good job. And I still have a lot to learn. You know, I'm not a specialist. I still don't see myself as a specialist. I still learn every day. If I work with my dogs or if I'm following animal trailing, if I trail animals, then I still learn from them. So you can never know enough. At least I don't know enough. I want to know much more. I'm too short to live. I need another lifetime to learn all that. But the more knowledge you can gather, then you have the quality that you want. You want quality, and there's a lot of hobbyists, hobby kind of things going on. And the intentions are good, but you want quality because I remember sometimes that somebody, I don't even know what the subject was, but there was somebody, no, dogs can't do that. And I was going like, dogs can't do that. Why not? Yeah, we've done it and it didn't work. So how many dogs have you trained to see if it works? Yeah, only one. That's not research. And where does the dog come from? Yeah, it was a family dog. Did you test on the qualities of it? No. So how can you say it doesn't work? There's a lot of more background needed to do that. But it's also something in the scientific world that I have a problem with, because I saw, for example, a research that was published where they had tested 2 dogs. There were 2 family dogs detecting, I think, cancer or something like that. And I'm going like, and then they had they had the 60% score that they detected it, and there was a discussion going on. I go like, yeah, it's a proof of principle. I like the study, but this is not a study. This is just, you haven't looked at the dog's quality. You haven't looked at the handler quality. There are so many different aspects that you need to take into account to make a good research. But it was published. So, and then I go like, yeah, people get an image from that. And if you have a better dog with better handler, better training, you might have had 90% score.
Yeah.
And that's what I as a scientist and as a dog trainer handler look at, and I go like, come on, this quality could be better, you know?
Yeah. Yes.
And then there are some very good researchers. I mean, I've seen a research. Ade Schoon did a beautiful research about river otters and the amount of scent samples you then need. But it's thought through. It's like, if you have this, you have that, you test them on this one, you test them on that one. That's good, you know? Then you're working based upon science. That's what you want.
Yeah.
And then you can take less samples, you still get the same quality.
Yes.
But that's something you have to make a good training protocol, and you have to think every step through.
Yeah.
And even a bit more than that, so that you can have everything and you take just this amount that you need, but still you have the rest as backup when something goes wrong.
I've just put up on the screen there, Ilka from Finland has been watching. So Ilka's a world-renowned dog instructor, and anybody that knows Ilka will know that he uses think, plan, do, and analyze, TPDA. Yes. He uses that all the time.
That's it. So yeah. Yeah. And that's every time. Yeah. I think that's the perfect. Yeah. That's it. And the more you know, the more you know you don't know. So the more you can take with you in order to make it the best you can.
Yeah, definitely. That's our hour. It's gone quite quickly,
already.
Michel.
Yes,
already. We've had I've got 2 laptops here on the go. We've had people watching from Durban, South Africa, Denmark, Italy, Ireland, Switzerland, Malaysia, Indonesia. So we've had lots of people watching. I thank you for coming and taking part in this.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
No, it's no problem. I know that you are someone that tries to keep off the radar.
Yes, I still do.
Difficult to get you to come on here because you are very, very good at. You're an expert. Even though you say you're still learning, you're an expert in your field, and yeah, you try and keep off the radar. But thank you very much for coming on tonight. It's really interesting, and hopefully we'll have you back for another hour because there's still more to talk about, Michel.
Oh yes, there's a lot more to talk about, indeed.
So yeah, thank you.
More to touch on.
Thank you very much, Michel. It's been really good to have you on tonight.
You're welcome. I had to get used again to the English. It's been a while that I spoke English, so forgive me if I was searching for words. But it went reasonably well.
Thanks. English is really good. Thank you very much, Michel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And enjoy.
Okay, so brilliant. Thank you, Michel. That was excellent. Like all of the people that we've had on here, we've only covered in an hour a little bit of what Michel knows and what he can tell us. So hopefully we'll have him back at some point. We've got some more speakers lined up. So if you keep an eye on our Facebook page, you'll see who we've got coming in the next few weeks. Thank you for watching. Thanks for all your questions. If you've got any questions, please feel free from tonight. Please feel free to forward them on to me, and I can send them on to Michel, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them. So thanks very much for watching, and yeah, see you on the next one.